The president bypassed Congress. He issued an executive order that changes the language for federal contracts to include sexual orientation and gender identity. We'll ask the Alliance Defending Freedom how that will impact Christian colleges and organizations. This is the Citizen Link Report. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard, and I had a very helpful conversation with Jeremy Tedesco via Skype. He's Senior Legal Counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom. First, I asked him about the impact of the President's executive order.
Well, essentially what the order says is you have to abandon your religious faith as a religious organization in order to do business with the federal government. And that's a problem. That's something the federal government should never be telling religious organizations, especially in this context where the administration knows that these organizations provide essential social services to people who are in need, both domestically and internationally.
Now, a fact sheet that the White House put out says that the religious exemption is still in place in the sense that you can hire people who agree with your religious affiliation, who are a member of the same group that you're part of. But it seems that it does not include anything beyond that, meaning if somebody comes in and says, yeah, sure, I'm a Southern Baptist, and my partner and I got married last year, what would actually happen in that situation?
Well, I think that's part of the problem is we don't know. What the administration should have done when it acts in this kind of capacity is make sure that it provides broad protections explicitly in an executive order for religious organizations. So there's no question about what it means and what the implications are. You know, our concerns are that, numerous religious leaders across a broad cross section of them, many from a liberal, many from a conservative persuasion, asked the administration to include explicit exemptions and protections for religious organizations in this executive order, and he failed to do so, and that has meaning.
And what that's going to lead to is more lawsuits, right?
Well, we certainly could. We certainly have to watch how the administration enforces this executive order. Our concern obviously is that they will take actions that essentially punish religious organizations for practicing their faith. And one of the most essential exercises of the religious freedom protected by our Constitution is the right of religious organizations to hire people who agree with their religious beliefs, who are on board with their religious mission fully and completely. And this executive order threatens that core religious freedom.
As I've talked to people about this, one of the observations I've heard is from a Christian conservative point of view, we tend to think of this as having to deal with behavior. It's defined by behavior. Folks on the other side tend to look at this as, well, no, this is the identity of the person. Can those two ever meet? Is there any common ground between those two?
Well, I think it's important for religious organizations to follow their beliefs when it comes to sexual morality and sexual behavior. They have every constitutional right to adopt policies that reflect those beliefs and to require their employees to comply with those beliefs, both in what they express on behalf of the organization and in how they conduct themselves. And so religious organizations, I don't know of any who say, well, we're not going to hire you because you're gay. Their position is we've got standards when it comes to sexual morality and sexual conduct. And if you can't comply with those standards, you can't be an employee here. That is not, discrimination on the basis of somebody's identity. That's being selective on the basis of somebody's sexual behavior and conduct. That's inconsistent with the religious beliefs of the organization.
I want to hit you with a couple contrarian questions here. One thing that I'm hearing from people all around is, well, Christian colleges and organizations should just stop accepting federal dollars because this all comes down to whether you take federal grants and that sort of thing. How do you respond to that?
Well, the problem with that is religious organizations shouldn't be told they have to abandon their religious beliefs to do business with the federal government. And we know that in this day and age, the federal government is really ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It has its hands in everything. And so the notion that wherever the federal government or even some state or local government is in operation, religion has to remove itself from that field is incredibly problematic. I mean, essentially will marginalize religious organizations to the private sphere totally. And that's certainly not what our founders envisioned.
Now, the White House, along with putting out the executive order, also released a fact sheet dealing with it. And in that, the officials there detail their kind of a defense of this, saying, hey, we're leaving in place the same religious exemption language that George W. Bush had when he did a similar order. So what's the problem? We gave you the exemption you asked for, but you're still complaining.
Well, that order from President Bush primarily dealt with federal grants. This executive order deals with federal contracts. So I think it's true that the grant process, the protections from the Bush administration are still in place. President Obama could have handled this very easily and made it very clear rather than injecting all this confusion by just ensuring that the executive order included broad protections, the same broad protections that President Bush's order did years ago for federal contractors, but he didn't. And like I said before, that has meaning. We have to see what the administration is going to do with that and ultimately how federal agencies are going to interpret that. But there was a clear and easy thing for the administration to do, and that was include those religious protections. And you have to remember that the administration wasn't operating with a lack of knowledge. They know that religious organizations contract to provide essential social services domestically and internationally, and to people who are in desperate need of those services. So he knows these organizations exist, that they get contracts, and to not spell out specifically that they are protected and that their constitutional rights will be respected in this process is problematic and didn't need to happen.
Let's talk just for a second before we wrap up. Everyone who works for an organization that comes under this, a Christian organization, is already thinking, oh boy, we've got to hire somebody next week. How should they approach that, particularly if they have someone come in that they realize is likely going to challenge them legally?
Well, I think, first of all, understand that this executive order ultimately only deals with federal contractors, so people who bid on and win contracts with the federal government. So don't get me wrong, that's billions and billions of dollars, but it's still a narrow scope in the sense that federal grants are still covered by the Bush administration protections for religious organizations. Religious organizations shouldn't be afraid. They have every constitutional right to exercise their most fundamental First Amendment freedom, free exercise of religion, to hire and fire based on their religious beliefs and conduct standards. And if the federal government decides to punish them for doing so, they should call Alliance Defending Freedom, and we'll evaluate whether they've got a legal claim to bring to protect those rights.
And before I let you go, and this is the last question, just give us a sense of what Alliance Defending Freedom does as an organization. Many people have heard about it through our outlets, but I want to give you a chance just to explain in the general what it is you guys do.
Well, Alliance Defending Freedom is a legal organization that fights for religious liberty, life, and the sanctity of marriage. And we do that in the courts. We do that through strategy. We do that through training allied attorneys throughout the country. We really have a broad and diverse approach to trying to protect the core things that made America the great country that it is. And so we appreciate everyone's support as we attempt to protect our first liberty.
And we are happy to work alongside you. Jeremy, thank you for making time for us today. We appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Stuart.